Dork back again. Today on episode 11 of my Dorkcast, we're going to be talking about governed mayhem. I am quite the expert in mayhem, and I've recently stayed at a Holiday Inn Express where I learned an awful lot about data governance. I can't think of the word mayhem without thinking of this guy. What tremendous marketing and branding, right? Like you say the word and you just immediately see this guy getting into all kinds of trouble. Now, usually he does things that insurance would cover, but imagine if he worked in a data world. He might do something like this. Hey, I've got a 3-week-old Excel sheet and a cocktail napkin from Sally with some really important numbers she scribbled on it yesterday at lunch. Of course, I could generate a board report before I leave in 15 minutes. That seems like mayhem if you're used to a governed world. For others, it could seem like yesterday. It could seem like your normal way of operating is just grabbing data from wherever you can get it and hoping for the best. Unlike me, my guest today, Laura Madsen, who's the CEO and Senior Vice President of Data Strategy for Moxy Analytics, is an expert not only in mayhem, but in governance. And there's people in the world that you say, oh, that person's so smart, they should write a book on the subject. Laura's literally written the book called Disrupting Data Governance. Laura, say hello.
Hello, Laura.
Very nice. Very nice. I figured you'd do something like that. Now, that picture that I showed, just confirm for everybody, that's kind of real world, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. Pretty sure I've actually had that conversation.
Yeah. And you got that look on your face like I've been forced to do that thing before as well. Maybe recently. I don't know. But here's the problem I have, Lauren, and I don't know if you face the same problem. When I say the word governance, I get eggs thrown at me, rotten tomatoes, and that's just from my family. You should see the violence that breaks out when I say that in sessions at conferences, because there is just such a negative connotation to the word governance. Do you kind of feel that you've experienced that as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's tough, right? Because I think in many respects, we've earned that reputation as governance practitioners of being the obstacle, right? Not the partner, but the reason that stuff gets stopped or slowed down. So yeah, we've made our own bed.
And man, I'm guessing that like me, you haven't earned a whole lot of friends when you say things like that, even though it's well-meaning. Now, we're going to talk more about your book and your practice, but I want to share with people a quote from your book to help them see what you've said. I'd rarely seen traditional data governance practices working end to end because so much of it focused on controlling data rather than using data. And I know that was my experience, and that's the experience I try to share in conferences. And they're like, but what's the answer? But what's the answer? But what's the answer? So I'm like, wow, if I had an answer, I'd probably write a book about how to disrupt these traditional data governance practices. And I'm guessing that probably is what drove you to write the book too.
Yeah, I mean, the book really came out of a moment in time where I did a state of the state for data as an industry. And one of the things that I kept seeing was that either governance programs were just completely missing, right? We just chucked them over the wall because we couldn't figure it out. Or the ones that did exist were so based on this command and control structure that the organization wasn't really able to gain insights from their data. There was very little in between. And so the intention with the book was really a call to action. Like, I think we got to blow this thing up and see what happens. Like, because it ain't working. I can tell you that.
Yeah, no, that's what I saw traditionally was governance for the sake of building organizations and kingdoms. Because if I could control the data, boy, you better kiss my ring or you're not getting any of your data. And traditionally, those governance that are like that with lockdowns involve submit your request for data in a 50-page governance document, sign your name in blood, I will prioritize it based on whether you voted for my FTE request or not. And then we'll get you your report, and you'll be able to tell us that, it doesn't answer the business question 9 months after you asked it, which is crazy.
Yeah.
You've got one more quote that I really wanted to share that I think is going to really help people transition, right? Because right now there's either mayhem, there's governance that people don't like. How are we going to get to something that actually works where we're governing the mayhem, right? And I like this one. Unfortunately, the people you're there to support, the people that need to use the data, shouldn't care about a policy and procedure document that I've had shoved in my face so many times. No, you can't get to that data. No, you're not allowed to see that data. Oh, no, 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 no. You might get the wrong answer with that data. We'll do it for you. And you even want to step farther to try to help. How are we going to get out of that scenario, right? And this is what I really loved. If you can't tie what you're doing right now to tangible business value, and I'm guessing it's for those people who need the data, it's time to step back and ask yourself why you're doing it. I really love that. Let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I just want to talk about those things. Sure. Because I think there's so much meat there that we could probably talk for as long as you've got available. And my listeners may already have tuned out once they saw the bow tie and just like, this isn't the show for me. Or they may hang around. So when you've gone into organizations, because I'm guessing that's part of what you do with Moxy Analytics, and you tell somebody, look, I need you to sit down and tell me why you're doing what you're doing with your governance. What are some of the answers you get?
Yeah, so a lot of the times I get called into organizations that like their governance has failed, right? And it's typically a scenario in which an executive calls me and says, all right, well, I know we need it. I have no idea what it means, but we've done this a few times, and can you come help figure out what happened? And a lot of the times, essentially what happened is there's a handful of scenarios, right? But essentially this command and control construct that we have loved about data governance for so long stopped everything from happening. And so there were an enormous amount of shadow sort of rogue systems that were created to get around it, right? And then something happened and it blew up. Or a lot of times what happens is you put a data governance leader in place and you put an enormous amount of pressure on that person. And, for a long time, we used to hire from within for these data governance functions. They knew where all the data bodies were buried. They had all the context in their head. Everything from the top came down to them. Everything from the bottom came up to them. And, they were under-resourced, underpaid, because nobody can articulate the value of data governance. And then they just quit and walked away, right? I've do a Dear Laura column, and somebody had pinged me saying, okay, I lost my data governance leader, and literally within 3 days, like everything fell apart and I don't know where the pieces are and what do I do now? And so we have these leaders that, have so much knowledge and no ability to really spread it out and share it because we put data governance in a corner somewhere. If it's not in a legal construct, it's over in IT and it's not spread around the organization. So, these are among a few other reasons why I get the phone call like, hey, gosh, it's broken. Can you come help me? And so a lot of it just is, how do we strike that right balance, right? A client asked me the other day, how can we create governance that's actually seen as a mechanism to accelerate deliverables? Mm-hmm. And I think it's completely feasible to do that. Mm-hmm. But it's got to be thoughtful. And it can't just be this idea of, preventing use, which thankfully I think a lot of people have kind of gotten over. But that control piece still seems to be hanging over our heads a lot. It's, well, I have all the policies and procedures. I don't know why anybody doesn't follow them. Well, because You know, I read these things. I've read hundreds of them in the last few months. I can't follow them. So why would you expect somebody that's just trying to do their actual job to be able to follow them?
Right. I've got, I'm in the scenario now. I'm trying to generate some reporting for our organization, and I've got access to some tables. I'm trying to produce sales reports for salespeople. I can't see their name. And the document says those fields have to be hidden. Like, I have to generate a report with the salesperson's name.
Right.
But the document says it has to be hidden.
Right.
And that, that just forces the mayhem. Well,
yes, it does. Mm-hmm.
I guess I'll keep an Excel sheet of their IDs.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll convert the names on the fly.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's bound to work for me for a
Sure.
day, and then it's going to stop working, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so when you go into those organizations who have kind of crashed and burned, are there unrealistic expectations of them that you're just going to magically, snap your fingers and it's going to work?
I suppose there's a little of that. Yeah. It's like, oh, she's a data governance expert, air quotes. And my, I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert. But I play one on TV, which is a very old joke. But I think what it is that when they do call the challenge really is the business, right? And this is where, and this is true for data in general, not just governance, but it's this added layer of complexity of that we have to operate at the speed of business.
Mm-hmm.
So even if I have an executive that is going to support data governance and understands that these things take time and you have to be thoughtful and thorough, the business executive is like, oh yeah, well, that's nice, but what about tomorrow? Is tomorrow okay? I mean, like, I didn't ask for yesterday, so tomorrow's nice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a little variable of that, of how can we quickly make progress from a governance perspective, because I think that's really, and that gets back to the value conversation, right? It's like, if you can't really tie what you're doing right now to value from a data governance perspective, from almost anything you do in the data world,
right,
then you need to really ask yourself what what you're doing. And that, by the way, that value is not defined by me as a data person. It's not defined by the data people at the organization. Value is actually defined by your business partner and your stakeholder. Right.
Well, let's get into some real meaty topics, things that people are going to say, that's all hype and wish-wash. Here's what I really deal with. When I worked at a health system, and I know you've got a healthcare background, you've written several books on healthcare IT. The number one thing that I faced, being a rookie back then, it was like 10 years ago. I was such a rookie back then. There's a single source of truth, and we need to document that single source of truth.
Yeah.
And I would have data governance meetings. All right, I've got my paper. Let's define what length of stay means. How hard could this be, Laura? It's just the length of stay. We had like 7 people arguing over what it meant. Do you believe there even is a single source of truth for the entire organization?
No. I know.
Oh my gosh. So if people are going around thinking we've got to have one metadata definition for every one of our important words, that's probably where they might be going awry anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, we get wrapped around the axle on that one a lot, don't we? It's like, oh, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be pristine. And everybody has to use the same definition. And, I mean, healthcare is tough. When I was doing a pre-read of my book, And I reached out to a couple of healthcare professionals. This one gentleman actually called me and said, this is terrible. You're going to kill people. I was like, no, I'm not, because I don't know one surgeon that's got a, click dashboard, right, up in the operating room, and and it's telling him what to do or her to do it. That's not how it works, right? For the most part, what we're doing is working with operational data, with business data, not with clinical data. And by the way, there's not one way to do this, and that's the contention with single source of truth that I really struggle with. I, just like many people, would not want a finance manager to be defining patient the same way a nurse does.
Correct.
Right. And that's a lot of the conversations that we have in healthcare, and I'm other industries as well, is, a sale is different if you're a sales manager or if you're an inventory manager, and for a long time, and it was an attempt to make it simple, right? To strip away some of the complexity, which was, look, the organization needs one way to think about this thing. But I think we've all recognized that my truth, right, is not necessarily Dalton's truth, right? A nurse manager's truth is not the same as a finance manager's truth. And there has to be an appreciation for those differences and nuances. That does not mean that we just let it go bananas, right? We don't just open up the coffers to the mayhem, as it were. What we do is we pick the standard definition that's blessed by the organization that you use to compare. And that's really what data should be able to provide you with, is action, an action, an opportunity to react to something. And when that's important, you need to be able to make sure that everybody is rationalizing against the same definition.
Right.
So you have one blessed definition that goes and you use to compare across campuses, across hospitals, across clinics, whatever your particular business is. But, in your day-to-day work, I don't care that a finance manager is using a different definition of patient or length of stay. Let her. Let her use that different definition all day long. But if she's got to go up and have a conversation about length of stay at a, comparing campuses, then she's got to use that blessed definition. And that's really where we have to make that distinction. But no, there is no such thing as a single source of truth. There's certainly a single source of the data, theoretically, comes from X place. It originates here. Even that origination theoretically isn't the truth, right? But that's a bigger, more probably esoteric conversation.
Yeah. And that's, I think, and you're hitting on the data and differentiating that from the answer.
Yeah.
My big thing that I've pointed out to people forever is data is not really valuable.
Yeah.
The Boolean logic that ties the data together is where the value comes in. And one of my big sayings is context is king. You've got to have that comparison. Otherwise, it's 17. Who cares, right?
Right. Yep.
And what I think is important is that I may have 10 different Boolean logic expressions to bring the same fields together from the same source. I need that one, like you say, how do I compare this facility to that facility to this facility to this floor unit to that, this bank to that. But as long as I've defined them well in some type of a dictionary, I'm happy if Sally Sue uses this, excludes that, and that's the formula that her team uses. I want them that freedom. And I think being able to get to, we will have different definitions of that Boolean logic.
Yeah.
It's what holds up so many governance programs.
Yes.
Right. It's why we can't do anything because we need one definition. Like, no, you don't really need one. You might need 100, and you'd be better off with 100. Yep. So the other thing I wanted to talk about that is very real world, right? And this is there's no way to get around this. because I know I never say it, and I don't think you ever say, just give everybody access to every bit of data and let them do self-service, because there are things like HIPAA and GDPR and SOX,
Yep.
SACs too.
Yeah, probably
SOX
eventually. Yep.
California and states and countries saying you have to.
Yep.
And there's people in IT that are just scared, right? Like some of these things, there's rules that I could go to jail.
Yeah.
Like literally go to jail if I've done the wrong thing.
Yep.
So it's easy to understand that, hey, whoa. I don't care that they need the data. I'm not going to go to jail for them to have that answer. I need more time to figure it out. And that's real. So how do you help organizations balance and not overreact, though? How do you help them not overreact to, just because that's a definition, that doesn't mean that all of these other things have to happen?
Right. Yeah. Well, and the balance is really the critical piece, right? So I like to think about how we got here, right? There's always that historical perspective and that evolution. And for a long time, data governance was really the organization that sort of by default was your privacy, security, compliance, risk, infosec, whatever you wanted to, because there wasn't any other function that did that. Most hospitals, of course, if we're using our healthcare backgrounds, have had privacy officers for many, many years and legal officers, but they rarely got deep into the data. So it was you and I by default that were in control of how these data were looked at and accessed. And then we never made that adjustment as these careers started to sprout up around compliance and privacy and risk and information security. But these people are professionals. They know a lot more than certainly than I do about this work. But from a data governance perspective, we still held this as like our accountability. So one of the primary things that I advocate for is what I lovingly refer to as the happy alliance. Which is, there is no data governance effort without and this depends on your industry, your privacy, security, compliance, and risk folks at the table with you. They are accountable for that work. They are accountable for the policies. They are accountable for the procedures, which theoretically should be written in a way that I, as a data professional, could actually operationalize them into my, data repository. So it flips the switch on that. For a long time, data governance people were accountable. I am not accountable for that, right? I am responsible for that. They are accountable for that. And without that happy alliance, that breaks down. And if I were a data professional without that happy alliance, my first gut reaction would be like, yeah, no, you're not going to get that data.
Right.
So we have to create that happy alliance, because that actually makes your data governance function move faster. Because I can tell you that trying to do it when you're done and you're ready to go live into production with something that's really cool and innovative, and then you call up your privacy officer and you're like, hey, by the way, I'm using X, Y, and Z to do ABC. And they're like, no, you're not. And their first reaction is no, because they have to do what they have to do to keep you and the organization safe. So if you partner with them early on, that reduces that impact to having it done at the very end.
Right.
So the first thing you do is you create that happy alliance and have those folks sitting with you at the table as partner, because most of the ones that I have worked with, that's exactly what they want to do. They recognize that there's a lot of opportunity there. But their job is to keep everybody out of jail.
I tell you, just the difference between responsible for and accountable for, do you see like weight falling off these people's shoulders when you're in meeting room with them? Like I can't imagine how much that just must give people peace. I'm going to focus on what my role is, what I loved about the job opportunity that I saw when a recruiter reached out to me. And let me shed some of that burden that you've been dumping on me that you really shouldn't have. That's making me want to quit my job.
Right.
That's got to be a huge relief for people to free them to do the role that they love. Am I right, or am I just crazy?
Well, I have been surprised at the reaction. Actually, I knew it was kind of, oddly enough, I knew when I was writing it that it was kind of revolutionary, which at the time I felt like, gosh, this seems so obvious, right? But I've been surprised. So most of the privacy security professionals I work with, they're like, well, yeah, of course I'm accountable. That's my job.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the data professionals I work with, they're like, I'm not so sure about that, Madsen. And it just makes them nervous. And I think the nervousness is from a couple of perspectives. The first one is, as data professionals, we are under so much pressure to get blank word done, get stuff out the door.
Yep.
And so we tend to be that proxy that's like, okay, well, we're going to be the deciders of what is appropriate, which is a terrible idea, right?
Yeah.
But we do that because we're trying to operate at the speed of business, because we're always feeling that pressure, and that pressure isn't changing, right? It's not going away. So I think that's the reaction of a lot of people. Is like, oh gosh, I see it, but I can't do that. It's not the reality that I'm dealing with in my organization. And then there's a handful of them that are like, well, that's wonderful, but I don't have that in my company.
Right. Yeah. And I can imagine that somebody calls you in and like, I just today heard about this HIPAA stuff. I just heard about this GDPR stuff. Yeah. Can you help tell me if I'm in trouble or not? Do you help organizations do like a risk assessment to figure out where they're at? Is there action about to be taken that could hold them liable, or what?
No, I mean, I think you're better off going with the, a couple of the bigger firms that everybody knows that do audits really, really well. And by the way, if you're in healthcare, right, you should be doing those audits at least annually with, follow-up findings and things like that. What I generally do as part of the data governance assessment, so I have a sort of a standard way I approach data governance work when I'm either creating one net new or fixing one that's blown up, is, sort of an assessment at the top. One of the things I go through is I read all their policies and procedures. At that point, I will say, well, here's the things you need to be doing, and here's the person you should call. Otherwise, if I don't see anything, major, then I'll just kind of let that one float. But
Gotcha. And I mentioned it in your one quote. It's throughout the book. You got a whole section on it. Focusing on the people. I think that's those of us who are good with data, so much focus on data. Mm-hmm. I know there's a million personality tests that have been out, and one was about I forgot which one was like people and something and process and data. And I was like, I don't even need to take the test. I'm like, I know I want the process, I want the data. Mm-hmm. But it really, we got to figure out how to balance that stuff, right? Because there is a personality that's way extreme. Yep. We need to figure out how to get these teams working as a team, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really where the work is. We've solved for a lot of the technical complexities over the years, right? I mean, there are tools that exist that never existed before. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what we're dealing with in the data industry is not related to technology. It's not related to architectural challenges. There was a time when that was true, where, the tools weren't capable, so we had to, do amazing things with our architectural frameworks. The tools caught up, and then we could simplify our architectural frameworks. simplify, air quotes.
Mhm.
The consistency in terms of our, and I just say that our general in the data industry inability to deliver value to our organizations comes down to, sorry, I don't talk a lot, so I'm losing my voice. Comes down to our, our teams, our people, because as you said earlier, right, the data is just data. It's just bits and bytes. It's neither right or wrong. And
Mhm.
and that, kind of like, wait, what? But it's true. All of this is like, none of it means anything, right? We make up all of the meaning, we as in humans.
Mhm.
So our inability to get that human aspect of this right is really the thing that has gotten in our way. You have people, of course, and we've talked over the years and data about personas, right? So the easiest persona that everybody talks about is this. You have your super user, right, that just wants to get into the data and doesn't care about anything else, and just give me some spreadsheets and don't make it pretty,
Mhm.
And then you have on the other side of that continuum, this probably not very evenly distributed bell curve, is your executives who want to go out and, open up their laptop in the morning, and if it's a green screen, they go get coffee. If it's a red screen, they call someone, right? In the middle on that continuum, you have everybody else.
Mhm.
And it's that everybody else really that where all the work sits. But then on the flip side of that, you have people that are the deliverers of the data, right? And you have people that are super technical, that don't really want to talk to people, just want to bang against the metal all day, or bang against the cloud, I guess now all day. And then you have probably at this point in my career, people like me who are, high level thought leaders. I hate that term, strategists that, couldn't do that anymore if I tried, right? The level of complexity we've created as a result of that is really, really hard.
Right.
And that is really where the magic happens, right? If we can get the teams to understand the roles and responsibilities and provide some clarity. One of the things I say to my clients all the time is like, look, I can pontificate all you want, but my job before I leave is to help your teams understand what they're doing on an average Tuesday.
Right.
And that is where we struggle. And it's particularly true with governance. Like I can be, we can talk about this 50,000 foot view strategy, why governance is important. We can talk about the fact that we struggle to identify value to a business person from a governance. We can talk about all those things all day long. But what really matters is, what Sally Mae or Sally Sue is doing on an average Tuesday.
Yep.
Because if you can keep that nugget, if you can keep, Sally and her whole team focused on what they're doing and just keep moving that along, just keep swimming, as Dory says,
Yeah.
you can get this done.
Right.
Because there is no big milestone. There's no magic moment where you can check the box that says data governance. You just kind of got to keep swimming. And stripping everything else away, the simplest way to do that is to make sure what people are supposed to be doing on an average Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
And that all comes down to the people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's we see all the time, work-life balance, and it's really work drives me crazy during those hours, and I have to get away from work because then I have to get my life and the things I love. The more I think that we can identify the right roles and responsibilities, be comfortable with me knowing what I'm supposed to be doing and just doing what I love doing and not being bogged down with all the other things that keep me in massive amounts of stress, the better off we're going to be. Right. So I think what you're doing is amazing, Laura. I always have, but I know when the book came out, there was a little bit of resistance in the market, right? Like, what do you mean you want to disrupt what we've been doing for a long time?
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How
Love
did
it.
you deal? I mean, just for fun, we'll pretend the
Sure.
camera's not on anymore. It is, but we'll pretend. How did you deal with that after spending so long creating it and kind of having almost a little bit of a backlash from the "we've always been" folks?
Eh.
That a girl?
Yep. Look, you know this about me, Dalton. I love to blow stuff up. I love it. And the problem is that when that is, used for evil instead of for good, it's really, really destructive.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the things that I know about myself is, I make a terrible employee. First couple of years, I'm a rock star, right? Because all of a sudden I'm in there and I'm messing stuff up, and people are like, "Oh, finally!" But then after that, people like sort of like, well, what we're dealing with in the real world right now, right? It's like people get exhausted by that, and they just can't take it anymore. And then they're like, "Oh, here comes Madsen. She's gonna blow something up. I'm gonna run the other direction."
Yeah.
So I knew going into, just by the title, Disrupting Data Governance, that I was going to ruffle some feathers, but I genuinely didn't. Sounds cruel, and I don't really mean it like this. At the very broad, like macro level, I didn't care because we needed it. We needed some tough love, right? I have an enormous amount of empathy for those people, like you and I in our history, that have to sit there and do this day in and day out with all the pressures that we have.
Yep.
And it's for those people that I wrote the book, because they're being asked to do things that are not feasible. And if somebody can talk to them about disrupting the governance construct enough to focus on what's really valuable, and by the way, it's 4 things. It's usage, quality, lineage, and protection. Right? We can have beautiful, eloquent ways of describing data governance. Other organizations have written those really, really well. But to me, it's those 4 operational things that we have to focus on, those categories. And if, as an individual in an organization, if we can have a book that helps me have that conversation with a leader, that was really important to me. And the interesting thing is, as people were reading the book, you're right, there was a bit of like, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing? You're crazy, blah, blah, blah." I've heard it all before. Like, bring it on. It's a really disturbing part of my personality that enjoys the mayhem. But it was the people that were practitioners in their companies that emailed me and just like, "Thank you."
Yeah.
I literally, for the first time, feel seen.
Yeah.
And that's all I needed. It was good enough for me, because that's who I wrote the book for.
Good. And that's, I believe what you wrote before you wrote it. I was super happy to see our CEO, Mike Capone, actually write the foreword for you, because he believed in it. And he also believed that governance kind of needed a little bit of disruption.
Absolutely.
So so happy to see the success from it. And I'm sure that the organizations that you're working with now are seeing phenomenal results, and our poster children for the process. And I'm sure it continues to evolve. Do you see anything, like, as a result of COVID and all this work at home? Have you seen any other, continued enhancements to governance? Like, how do we protect our data for people consuming it mobilely now and at home?
Right.
Any other things that are, kind of, real world as a result of what's going on socially that you got to worry about?
I think that probably the big thing that we've all been dealing with a little bit is the expansion of the GDPR like legislation across the US. And that, when I wrote the book, was not all that prolific at that point. But now it is a lot more widespread. And so it is this balance, because there are a lot more things that are happening in terms of fines that will literally call out lack of data governance. And whereas 2-3 years ago, that was not happening.
Right.
So there's definitely that part that, that's keeping a lot of us up at night. But there's also a part, and this will continue to be really at the core of what we're all dealing with. 20 plus years ago, when I started my career in data, I was the one person in the organization that I worked in that outside of accounting knew how to deal with numbers. And could use software, at the time, like Excel or other pieces of software to make the numbers mean something to somebody, right? Now, most people are trained in that in some capacity. There's a lot more understanding and appreciation and depth around software in general, in numbers in general, in visualizations. Right. And so it's not that you have these 1-2 people in organizations that know this stuff anymore. And that's both a good thing and a bad thing. Right. And we have to figure out what that really means. And we even see it, in how we think about deploying data in an organization, sort of the concept of thought leaders versus influencers. So we have a lot more people in the mix.
Right.
And, those two things are probably the bigger variables that we've got to figure out how to really come to terms with.
Yeah. That's the insanity. When I started my career, there was 2 or 3 people asking me for information.
Yeah.
Now these people expect they can get it themselves, and they want a spinning 5D pie chart that gives back rubs while they're watching it.
Yep.
Right. And it's crazy what we can do with data. I really appreciate your time. Is there one final statement you would want to say, either to those organizations who are at the governance sucks, I hate that word, organization, or the we're just having complete mayhem with our data because we have no governance? Is there one final thing you'd like to close us out with for either of those organizations?
I had asked my publisher to title the book "Data Governance Sucks," and they said no. Yeah,
I like the way you think.
Look, at the end of the day, it just keeps swimming. That's what it's about. It's just keep swimming, keep up the good fight. There's some wins that can be had. Not super insightful or eloquent, but that's the reality. That's the reality.
And that's kind of what we're all about. Let's just be real. Right. That's nobody's going to believe you if you said you had one answer, it's going to solve it.
Right. Yeah. No.
So, well, we will go ahead and end it with that. I appreciate your time, and if you're out there watching, just keep swimming and keep up the fight.